We're here for you with another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This one is for the week of August 27th. We are recording it on the 26th here in Chicago. And if you're still counting, this is number 116 done via Zoom since we could no longer go in the WLUW studios. Today, we're going to welcome the renowned alderwoman activist Helen Shiller and a great musician, Tukkiman, who was on the show a couple of years back, and we're going to check in with him. A little bit of good things. President Biden seems to be on a roll getting things through Congress. His latest is the relinquishing of student debt or the canceling of student debt. I think it's $10,000 up to $20,000 if you had a Pell Grant. And the president also called out was critical of Republican members of Congress who were opposed to forgiving these student loans, but on the other hand, had already had their loans forgiven. Another good thing came in the mail is the Sun magazine. If you have not ever read it, it's wonderful. Readers write, people write, beautiful photographs, and it is this is number 560, and you can find it if you want to find it. You'd be glad you did. On the voting front, well, I'm going to look a little bit at New York. I got this information, I believe, from when I typed in news for progressives. And in the New York primaries the other day, there was some talk about how the progressives lost to centrists, but this report says, but on the down ballot, the state Senate primaries held across New York City, there were plenty of good news for progressives and socialists. The left possesses much more clout in Albany than at the national level, and after some impressive electoral performances Tuesday, there will be 3 members of the Democratic Socialists of America in the New York State Senate come 2023. On the health front, the president is planning on a booster shot campaign in early September. These will be updated shots specifically made effective against the Omicron variant. On a sad note, I'm going to repeat the Gloria McCartney, a wonderful person, a great yoga instructor, and good friend of our co-producer, Katie Hogan. Gloria McCartney passed away. We learned of it a little bit late and did not get to go to the memorial. And that same thing happened with another really wonderful fellow, Stan Champion, musician who really served the people. I had seen that there was a death. I thought it was his father. It turned out that I was reading something from one of his kids, and Stan passed away. If you wanted to see a really nice interview we did with Stan, go to Live from the Heart. Well, go to youtube.com/Heartland Media. And if you type in his name, you'll come up with an interview we did on March 2nd in 2019. This was an interesting one. The Washington Post reported that in a fiery midterm speech, this I think was on Thursday, President Biden cast the Republican Party as one that was dangerously consumed with anti-democratic forces that had turned toward semi-fascism. Now think about that. The President of the United States is using the term fascism about a good element, a good chunk of the opposition. And we've been talking about the fascist underbelly in this country for a long time. And I'm just going to encourage you all to do everything you can to get people to vote. Wherever you know Democrats, no matter if they're to the center, a little bit to the right, to the left, go for the Democrats at this time. Our democracy does depend upon it. On the sports front, the Sky advances. That's in the Women's National Basketball Association. They will play on Sunday against the Connecticut Sun. The Sox have been stumbling. I got to say, I've been watching these games, and it just isn't working out. But I got great hope for tonight. And Northwestern University Wildcats will be playing a football game in Ireland against Nebraska tomorrow, the day that this show airs on WLUW 88.7, 9 in the morning. And what else on the sports front? The Cubs are mired in third in the Central, not doing too well. On the labor front, those of you who missed it 2 weeks ago, we had Bob Lawson on. If you go to youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos, you can find that interview. Comprehensive, talks about labor. But right close to home, Starbucks has lost 3 and won 4 elections in Chicago. The most recent was 6350 North Broadway in Edgewater. And they're on the Starbucks at Ashland and Irving, right there by Lakeview High School, where we used to sell Rising Up Angry newspapers. The Starbucks workers have just filed for an election. Environmental, little history kind of news. Record droughts and receding rivers caused by heat waves are leading to discoveries. Ancient cemetery was found in Iraq, where the Euphrates receded, and ancient Buddhist statues in China along the Yangtze River, and dinosaur tracks in Texas. Okay, around the world, we got a situation continues in Ukraine. The nuclear plant there that provides a lot of power for Europe is dangerously close to the shelling. Nuclear disaster is high risk if left unattended. And because of the war, we have enhanced food shortages, hunger, and war. Okay, on the Rogers Park front, a lot of us are resting up after a busy weekend at the Glenwood Avenue Arts Fest. Funkadacey, who did their first show ever back in the old days at the Heartland Cafe, brought it all home on Sunday night. And also here in Rogers Park, if you're wandering around, on Sunday at 1509 Lunt, I will be on my front porch with the Prairie Dancer Front Porch Studio Gallery. A lot of pictures, discussions, having a good time. We'll be right back with a couple of guests. We got Helen Shiller coming up. She has a new autobiography coming out, and it is really compelling, honest, revealing. Look forward to talking to her. We'll be right back with a little bit more live from the Heartland.
Good choice.
What it is, yes, but what it is, I'd like to hear the issues. I don't want to hear them barking at each other about who's better and who's this. We need to find out who's going to do what.
So far, so good.
Because this is a strange time in this nation right now. This nation and this city is fighting for its soul. Mm-hmm. In 40 years, some of us won't be able to live here, depending on what's going on. I mean, there are 64 cranes up in this city. 64 cranes? Mm-hmm. In University of Chicago, there are 3 cranes on one block. 3 cranes on one block.
Obama Center.
Well, that means, there's an opportunity here, and that's what we need to take advantage of these opportunities, and we need to see what these candidates are going to bring to the table for everybody. Because if you're a business, if only 10% of the nation can buy your products, you'll be closing down like some of the stores that we're seeing. They're closing down because of that same reason. And people need to wake up, and they're talking about $15 an hour, for minimum wage. People are not going to save money. They're going to spend and consume. So these people who have money are going to make more money if they give people some money to spend. And remember when we were coming up, it was like what you made a week on your job was what you paid in rent. That's blown out of the water right now.
That's true.
So that's why we're all suffering from things, because people can't raise kids because they're working like hell.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome back to a little bit more live from the Heartland. I'm Michael James, and it really gives me great pleasure to bring on our next guest, someone I've actually known, I think, since 1968 when I met her on her rebound from a trip to Cuba on Berry Street at some friend's house. And I've watched her career, and I'm really glad to have Helen Shiller coming on. Let me tell you a little bit about why we brought her on. I mean, she's always interesting, but she has a new book coming out to be published by Haymarket Press here in Chicago. It's called Daring to Struggle, Daring to Win. It tells the fascinating true story of a radical organizer turned independent city council member who has fought for justice in Chicago for 40 years. It goes on. I could read it, but I think I'll just start talking about it. Helen, in reading the book, which is the first time I actually read a book online, and I didn't read all of it. I read a third of it, and I'm going to finish it. But it brought back an awful lot of memories. And I was kind of, even though I'm a little older than you, there were a lot of things that struck my attention or caught my attention about our fathers who both had strokes, and we were avid Brooklyn Dodger fans until they moved away. And one of the things that I know, my dad would not buy any beer or any products from Wisconsin during the McCarthy period. Your dad also hipped you to the McCarthy period and what was going on. So tell us a little bit about your early years and fighting fascism, McCarthyism, and communism in your youth.
Well, I guess the main thing is the story that the most illustrative is the story that I start the book with, which, or close to the beginning of the book, is my dad, when I was in kindergarten, kept me home from school. I had two older brothers. He only kept me home. And sat me down in front of our TV, which was one of those big round thing, big square things that sit on the ground. It was early, huh?
Was it a Dumont?
I can't remember. I don't know. And had me watch the Army McCarthy hearings. And he said, I know you're probably not going to remember any of the content here, but hopefully you'll remember that I had you do this. And all I really want you to remember about why is that no matter what, in your lifetime, you need to know and you need to be prepared to fight fascism. It's the most important thing. And my dad, who had come to this country when he was 12 years old, pretending to be 16 because he was coming alone, had to, from Lafayette, he came in 1920, so there was very little ability to communicate with his family. And during the late 30s was very much aware of fascism and very much tuned into what was going on in Europe and concerned about it, tried to join the army, wasn't allowed to because they thought he was too old because they had the wrong age and that was his legal age. So he started his own business, but he was a chemical engineer, and that's part of the story as well. At any rate, he really, unlike your dad, so similar to your dad, except my dad boycotted all products from Germany for many years, almost disowned my brother when he bought a Carmen Ghia. Many years later, he was, very heartfelt. Most of his family was killed in the Holocaust. So this was a very big deal, and it's something I never forgot. And when I was 18, the movie Point of Order came out, which is the film version of the hearings and represents the actual footage. So of course I saw it and had to and was reminded of all of that, and the story continues.
I think you were living in, I don't know if you were in Long Island or in the Bronx, but you, in the book, you talk about you were growing up in a pretty much all Jewish environment, and then your parents shipped you off to sounds like a progressive school called the Woodstock Country School up in Vermont. Yeah. And I'm wondering what that was like for you as a young teenager, I think, to go from an all-Jewish environment in New York up into the country where there were a lot of Anglo-Saxon Protestant kids who may have been progressive, but did come from privilege.
Well, so there was, there's multiple answers to that question. So yeah, we lived in a predominantly Jewish community, and my parents were both Jewish immigrants. And always were very tight, not my dad so much, who didn't have family, but very much engaged in the life of the Jewish community from a much more cultural and progressive perspective. There's a lot of diversity within the Jewish community. I didn't realize that until I came to Chicago, actually. So we lived but they lived by the time we were in Long Island and by the time they sent me to school, we were in a pretty solidly middle class. But when I got to Woodstock, these were many of the students. There were only 100 students at any given time in the school. Many of them were the sons and daughters of wealthier people from the Northeast, and had sort of a different and clearly white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. But many of them also were from very progressive organizations, and almost all of the students were rebels of one sort or another. That's how they ended up there. So The biggest issue that I really had with folks, more so than anything else, was my accent. I mean, I was constantly, my first or second year there, they constantly made fun of my very thick at the time Long Island accent. But there was so much discussion about civil rights because of the nature of, because of the family histories of many of the people who were there, but also it was a very progressive school. And it was small, it was progressive, but it also was in the middle of Vermont, and they had all these different aspects to it. And there was struggle, I think, quiet struggle around racism. There were 100 students, and maybe 5 of them were African American, maybe 5 or 6, or maybe between 5 and 10 were Jewish. The rest majority were from pretty much were white, middle class, some upper middle class. Yeah.
You end up going off to University of Wisconsin. You wanted to get away from the East Coast, and you end up in Madison. And share a little bit about how you got involved with the movement. I know you used to like to sew a lot, and you got involved with some anti-war stuff in a play. Tell us a little bit about Wisconsin, and then we're going to talk about you moving out to Racine.
Okay, so I went to Madison, Wisconsin. It was a large school, my primary goal. My dad was really concerned that I wasn't more involved in the anti-war movement. And when I had been at Woodstock, I had done I sewed my own clothes because I couldn't afford to really compete with the styles of my classmates. And then they started asking me to sew for them. So I did a lot of sewing. So I'm in Woodstock. I'm in Madison. My dad's just harangued me for most of the summer between my freshman and sophomore years about how I had to be more involved. And so I'm looking for a way to get engaged in the anti-war movement. And I see that there's a play called The Hostage by Brendan Behan, a play being put on by the Committee to End the War in Vietnam. And I go, oh, I can do that. I can make costumes. So I offer my services. They gratefully accept them. And the play itself is essentially, from my perspective, a morality play that is really raises the kinds of questions that I think anyone engaged in change has to think about. So it really got me. And then I got involved with other people that were involved in the anti-war movement, obviously, and the story goes on.
Give us a little bit on Vietnam Summer. Tell people what it was. I think we should have had elect the Democrats summer this summer. Maybe we did around the country in some ways. But Vietnam Summer, and then your decision to demonstrate against Dow Chemical.
So Vietnam Summer was a summer in Boston, in the Boston area, and I had gone there and it was basically a call to people all over the country, to young people, to getting engaged in the anti-war movement. And there were lots of opportunities to do many things, including political education, but also actions. But we also were able to, there were people from everywhere, so we got a sense of a much bigger movement. I was there largely. I ended up there because I was there also taking some summer classes, and decided to go there because of Vietnam Summer. I came back. When I was there, I connected with several people who were also from Madison. When we came back, there was discussion about how Dow Chemical, who was making much of the napalm and Agent Orange being used in Vietnam, that they were planning on recruiting students to work for them on campus. And we were vehemently opposed to that, many of us. And so there was a group that was planning to do a picket around the building where the students were going. It was the chemical building. And there was the core of us, many of whom had come from, had met in Vietnam at the Vietnam Summer, decided that we wanted to sit in. And at a big meeting the night before, we basically forced the issue. And when there was a lot of opposition to this notion, we asked everyone who wanted to join us to vote with their feet and to move to one side of the room. And half the people did. We had about 100 people who said yes. We said, okay, we're going. So that's the next day. We were ultimately 300 strong in the basement of the chemical building, blocking the entrance of anyone wanting to be recruited.
In reading the book, you bring up Miles Horton and the Highlander Folk School. And back in the days when we called it the movement, and we were all part of that, I think we should start talking about the movement again. Miles Horton and the Highlander Folk School, not only did we learn about it, but we got to visit it too.
Mhm.
I did, and I know you did.
No, I
Cheryl,
didn't actually ever get there.
too bad your parents didn't let you go, as I recall now.
Yeah,
Anyhow,
well,
but he was an influence on you.
I knew his son, and as a result, I knew about him. When I went at Woodstock, I knew his son. He was one of the other students, as was Mika Seeger, Pete Seeger's daughter. She was my roommate and a friend. And so and then also during that time, while I was there, Kennedy was killed. King was killed, right? Yeah, while I was still there. Is that true? What year was he killed?
I don't remember.
Losing my mind. But anyway, there was a series. No, I think King was killed later. Malcolm X was killed. The missile crisis over Cuba occurred. So there were all these things happening, and therefore a huge amount of conversation, and informed. Also, the son of the editor of the Monthly Review was there. So we had lots of conversations, and we had some extraordinary history teachers as well, who were all over the map in terms of their politics, but were so completely they were such good history teachers that we had such a good sense of context for all of these things that were going on. So there was an incredible amount of conversation, and all of our experiences came into play there. So that was very important from my perspective. And there were students every summer, as I recall, at least I remember this, who did go to the Highlander School, which is why I wanted for the summer, which is why I really wanted to go the summer that they were burned down by the Klan. And so there was a hiatus. I will learn later that they continued and they worked somewhere else that summer, but I didn't get to go.
Back in the day, we all wanted to go to Cuba, and it took me till later to go, but you went. And tell us a little bit about that. You bring up a couple of names. Marilyn Webb, who I think I still am in touch with, Tom Mosher, who I'm glad I never see, and Sue Jankowski, who I don't know where she is these days. Yeah. But Cuba was important for the movement. It was inspirational in so many ways. You went, and it was on your way back from Cuba that I first met you. Tell us about your little trip to Cuba.
It was sponsored by the Students for a Democratic Society. The initial reason for it was that there had been leading members of the Black Panther Party had made an attempt to go to Cuba through Mexico City, and in Mexico City they were essentially hijacked by one or another of the U.S. intelligence agencies, and ultimately sent back to the opposite coast from which they came, somewhere from the East Coast and from the West. So my recollection of it was that SDS decided that they were going to sort of in your face, we're going to follow that same path. I don't know. I mean, it's sort of an ironic twist to privilege, but so there were 30 of us, all white students except for one, a Puerto Rican woman from New York, and Irgard Iglesias, and we went through we took the same trail that they did, and ended up in Cuba for about 8 weeks. We traveled the entire country, met people everywhere, saw a lot of the things that were being done, met with people who were there from multiple countries, engaged in liberation, where people were engaged in liberation movements, who were there for rest and relaxation, and for R&R. And it was really, it was a very encouraging time. It was early on. There were a lot of things going on, and there was a lot of change occurring. We saw lots of new health centers, lots of new factories being built. And it was the beginning of the plan, I guess, or campaign for Venturemos Brigade campaign, which is a whole other story. But the point of it was that when I came back, I was one of the people that was asked to be on a group that chose people or interviewed people who were going to be who were interested in going to Cuban brigades for many years after.
I had forgotten that thing when the Panthers were stopped from going to Cuba and dispersed to opposite ends of the country. there was a group of people from that may have been connected to you from the Movement newspaper, Joe Blum, Bobby Chichorka, and they got just grabbed on their way to Cuba and put in a car and driven back to the States. So
So
that
maybe
was,
the fact that there were 30 of us made the difference.
yeah. After you come back, there was a lot of talk in those days about community organizing. SDS had the Economic Research and Action Projects that created Join in Uptown and NCUP in New Jersey, et cetera, et cetera. You all went off to Racine. Give us a little report on your time in Racine and maybe the focus on the measles shots that kids weren't getting, and you all took up that challenge.
So there were there were 4 of us initially in Racine. Or actually there were originally 3, and then I got recruited to join them. 2 left around the time that Fred Hampton was killed. So I went to Racine in the summer of 1969. And we initially were working at factories. Mark Zalkin and I decided that we were going to we weren't going to do that any longer. We were going to start organizing among youth. We have been to the SDS convention in June in Chicago, and we're part of the group that was the broader group, the Revolutionary Youth Movement. And we wanted to make a connection with the Black Panther Party. We wanted to sell and did sell Black Panther papers. We brought young people to Chicago to the various different demonstrations that Fred Hampton had at the Federal Building around the Chicago 8 when Bobby Seale was being gagged and bound. And we started doing survival programs. We continued to do that after Fred was killed, and we began to broaden our involvement in the community and broaden and strengthen our survival programs. And out of that came a campaign to around German measles. The Board of Health in Racine decided that the best thing to do for German measles was to inoculate women who are pregnant with German measles. The German measles could be fatal if a woman who's pregnant gets it to the child, and we couldn't believe it. We were kind of outraged and engaged in a campaign that ultimately forced them to change their position.
You end up coming to Chicago. I remember when Mark Kaplan stayed at my house where you guys were looking at different organizations to join. You didn't join Rising Up Angry. You ended up going into Uptown. This is post-Join. Join had been an SDS project, and a lot of the names that came up in your book were names that, people who were real active in Join. Peggy Terry, Little Dovey, Big Dovey, Mary Hockenberry, and Virginia Bowers. Uptown was something else. And you talked about how appalling the conditions were. And you also talked about the ongoing daily routine of organizing. You mentioned a guy who had slammed the door 17 times on your face when you were talking to him about the paper, the Black Panther Party paper. And then finally he grabbed the paper and said, okay, come back next week and bring more papers. Tell us a little bit about the time in Uptown.
Well, he didn't say bring more papers. He said you can come back next week and bring me the next paper. But
Okay.
yeah.
Good enough.
So Uptown was a very different place than it is today. Although the reality of Uptown today has been greatly informed by the history in Uptown, I think. But it was in 1972 when I arrived there, living in Uptown with the largest concentration of poor white people probably in the country. Had a very large concentration of Native Americans, I believe, outside of any reservation in the country.
I think Denver might have been in common.
Maybe, but it was very large. Yeah, it's very possible. Had been the home or the part of the trail and the port of entry for many of the Japanese Americans who had been interned in California after World War II, and they got out. Many came to Chicago, many came through Uptown. Some were still living there, mostly seniors. Many of the families had moved to other communities, but some were still in Uptown. Had the oldest African American community in the city of Chicago outside of the Black Belt. Had 4,000 of the 10,000 HUD mortgaged high-rise affordable low-income building. Well, they were affordable. They weren't all low-income. Buildings that had been built in this late 60s and early 70s were housed in Uptown. And in those lived literally people from every continent in the world, including people from Chicago. But they all had their own characters. So this was an extremely diverse community. And also many of the Puerto Ricans who now mostly were going to Westtown after going from Clark and Division to Lakeview, were now moving mostly to Westtown and Humboldt Park, but some were still in Uptown. So we had this incredible diversity. We still had, and it was one of the only communities, I think, next to Hyde Park, which was more middle class. This was more poor and working class. It was one of the only here were in those two communities were diverse, were census tracts that weren't segregated. So it was also the one place in the city where if you had an interracial relationship, you could actually live. It didn't mean you didn't have issues, because even within the context of that diversity, blocks were very segregated. So that was Uptown. And most of the people who were here had been displaced from somewhere else. And their goal was to be able to stay somewhere, especially once they started talking to each other.
You made a decision along the way to run for alderwoman in the 46th Ward. Tell us how that came to be, and a couple of the highlights. I'm not sure did you run at the same time Harold ran, or before or after? I want to talk a little bit about Harold, but just tell us about why you ran for alderwoman and where that took you.
Okay, so first of all, part of one of our survivals programs was really being engaged in elections, but from the perspective of raising the questions and hopefully, and if we could get elect someone, that was great. So we supported Chachi Menace when we ran. I ran a series of 3 elections in a 9-month period of time in 78, 79, and swore I'd never run again. Support people, but I wasn't going to do that again. Harold, I did not run in 83. I coordinated the 46th Ward for Harold in 1983. And we were very much engaged in doing his literature, especially in the primary when we did it on faith that ultimately we'd be able to afford what we were doing. So in the mid 80s, after 2 years into his election, he was looking at what was he going to do to be able to change the dynamic. At that point, it was still 29 votes against him in the city council and 21 led by the so-called Verdoliak 29, led by Burke and Verdoliak. And so he started really working on me. I think it was pretty common knowledge, because I was very vocal, that I'd never run again. So he started working on me to do that. And ultimately, and then in 1985, early 86, in 1986, with the special elections that occurred as a result of a lawsuit that had been filed against the remap that had been done in 1981. And a consequence of that was that now the council is split 25-25. And Harold basically said, you can be my 26th vote. He'd been working on me already for a year or so. You can be my 26th vote. I need you to run for alderman. I couldn't say no at that point, because I knew that I could win. I knew that was a possibility, a good one. And that, so I said yes, and I ran for alderman. I told him that I was dedicated to be his 26th vote, but if I was going to run, I also was going to be equally committed to the notion that it is possible to create development without displacement, and that I wanted to do that, and I wanted him to help me do that. And so that was kind of the deal.
Well, I think, this is a big book, and I think we'll have you back and talk more about your time in office. I'd like you to share with us now for a moment why you decided not to run again, and then what have you done since? And then I'll ask you a final question.
So I was alderman for 24 years. Many things changed during that time. Several things are really clear. There's people think that as an alderman or in any elected official, or anytime anyone gets a position of power, always think they can do more than they can do. I don't think you can do any more than the sea in which you swim in, and that's created by people themselves. I mean, by people struggling. It's created by the people, by different activities and actions that people do to push the needle. But at any rate, it was It was 2000 and 2000. In 2007, I was 2006, I was ready to run for my last 4 years and really didn't want to do it. Because I didn't, and the question that was posed to me is that you don't want to run because you don't think you can win, or you don't want to run because you don't want to govern anymore. And I was clear, I knew I could win. I could have kept going. But to me, it wasn't just about holding power that I thought was elusive anyway. It was about really being able to finding the best arena to be effective in. So with George Atkins, who was my main campaign partner, or political partner, he said, I'll run your office. You make your list of things that you want to get done in your last term, since you have a list and that's why you want to stay there. And you can finish those things and I'll run your office. So that's what we did. And in 2011, I was ready to move on because I really didn't feel that that was the most effective place for me to be. And that the focus on which I had accomplished a lot, but I felt like we had built enough roots in so many different places that hopefully that would be enough to sustain many of the activities that we had accomplished. So I left the city council and basically since then, or for about the next 10 years, assisted my son, who asked me to come work for him initially to put together different systems in his law firm, and then to help him move his law office, which was a partnership with April Prayer, and to create what we ended up creating on the West Side, the West Side Center for Justice, and which hopefully is ready to move on its own.
Well, I have taken my students out to the West Side Center for Justice, and I brought you in the class. It's been great.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one last thing. The importance of having a movement that pushes elected officials, and then whatever you want to say about why people need to get this book that's coming out. What's the date?
October 17th is our launch.
Okay. So what about, we always talk about, well, we got to be involved in electoral politics. We have to build movement. We have to have activity in the streets. We have to do door-to-door knocking and, do community organizing. Put that all together for us.
Well, I think the most simple thing to say is that people making change is kind of like gravity. It's kind of like an orbit. You can't make change without creating friction. You have to broaden you have to move the orbit, right? You have to move the needle. And you only can do that if if you create enough activity that makes the change, and to understand that creates some friction as well. So that from an elected official's perspective, you may want to do much more than you're able to do in terms of what it takes to get something done. Usually you can't do things on your own. There's small things you can do. There's leadership you can provide. But ultimately, you need to be able to make sure that there's enough momentum outside, there's enough of a sea in which you can swim in, that you're able to, that sea not only gives you the support you need, but helps force the issue with other people who are on the fence or not so sure. So that for me, it's as important that there be people creating that sea as that you have officials that are elected that you think agree with you. So you have to really have that symbiotic relationship. And I think it's really important to stress, because often people say, oh my God, we finally got someone elected. They make them into a hero. They think that's going to solve all the problems. And in reality, unless they're engaged collectively, and unless elected officials welcome people to be pushing them from the left, you're not going to move toward the left. You'll move somewhere else. And that's what we've seen a lot in the country in the last 20 years. So do something. We all need to organize.
Helen Shiller, this was really nice talking to you. And I know we could talk more. I'm looking forward to having you talk to my students, and I look forward to running to you in person. Thanks a lot for coming on. All right, we'll see you. Stay tuned here on the left end of your dial, WLUW 88.7. We'll be right back with Tukkiman, one hell of a musician that you all want to know. Be right back.
Ooh, babe, let me know. That's my fantasy. reversing gravity. Your body's like a universe to me. Oh, babe, perfect astrology. Cause right now ain't nothing saving me. Oh, babe, where you taking me? Right now, don't hesitate. If you're ready, we can go to your galaxy. Ooh, baby, let me know.
Hey, we're back. We're back with more live from the Heartland for the week of August 27th. And it brings me great pleasure. I keep getting great pleasure doing this show to bring on a guy I met a couple years back called Tukkiman, all the way from Senegal. Good morning to you, my friend.
Hey, Michael, how are you?
I'm good. Tell our listeners a little bit about your journey from Senegal through Europe, all the way to the United States, and what you've been doing during the pandemic and now that people are out and about.
Well, the journey goes along with the music that like keep me motivated for like traveling and learning more. So when I started doing music back in Senegal, I had the chance to have a school in Paris so I can learn sound engineering will lead me to be a better producer. And then I start traveling around the world doing shows. This is how I end up in Chicago, and I love living in Chicago. It's like the best place for me right now. And yeah, of course, during the pandemic, it was super hard, but thanks God, things are getting back to aligning. We have a couple of shows coming up. We are very motivated. We are very excited. Yeah, that's it.
Well, this show will air and be streamed on Saturday morning, the 27th. And that's the day you are going to be playing Saturday night at the Montrose Saloon. So what's that?
I say awesome. Yeah, we played there a couple of shows before the pandemic. Now it's back open. We are very excited to be back over there.
Do you have any more shows coming up?
Oh yeah, we have Saturday for sure, and then we have Navy Pier September 4.
Okay, well, we can keep people abreast of it. What I like about your music is you mix a lot of stuff. If I was going to quote from your website, it says you're an internationally acclaimed singer, songwriter, and producer from Dakar, Senegal. Your music is a mix of Afro beats, reggae, smooth hip hop, and English pop.
Yeah.
How do you mix all those things together?
I mean, it's just like having the ear growing up in Africa, especially at home where my brothers was listening. I have 4 brothers and 6 sisters, and each one of them love a style of music, and I was the baby, so I had to hear all of those. And now growing up, I kind of like built my ear to be able to receive all of that. And when I started being a producer, it just came out naturally, picking from every genre to put it together.
One of the things that I remember about you is talking about music has no boundaries. And you've been quoted as saying there should be no borders, just like music, there are no boundaries.
Exactly. I mean, music is just like frequency that flows, and nobody can stop it from flowing. And that's why I associated with the idea of freedom and not having borders, because we are the one producing those frequencies, producing those music. So also we are we are driving art and culture throughout the world, so everybody get together in one beat. That's how I see it.
Tukkiman, you got a bunch of albums out, I think. Can you tell us the names of some of them?
Yeah, recently I have stopped putting album out. I just putting singles, because the way the digital market is now, you have to think about it before you put out album. So recently I had a good song mixed with Arabic and English and Wolof and Afro beat together. It's called I Swear, Bilai Wallah. And then and I released another song called Space, but the latest one is I Swear.
Give us your website where people can go find out more about you.
It's called Tukkiman, TUKKIMAN.com. So the spelling, everyone has its own spelling. When I say Tukkiman, people always asking me like how to spell it. So I always like going back and spelling back. So it's TUKKIMAN.com.
Tukkiman, what inspires you these days? If I had hit you up with what's the biggest influence or the most inspirational thing going on for you right now?
Right now, what really inspired me is like manifestation. You know, the idea of like pursuing your own happiness, and that's what inspired me.
Pursuing your own happiness. I like that. As an old guy, I'm going to get more and more into that. One last question. What are your hopes, your plans for your future? What do you hope for Senegal, for Africa, for the United States, for the world?
I mean, I just hope for more kindness and more care for each others, and like more respect for each others. And that's all. More sharing, more loving, and more freedom and more happiness for the rest of the world, you know?
I like that. And that people can get a little dose of that tonight at the Montrose Saloon. Tonight being Saturday.
Yeah, of course. Tonight is going to be hot, and come all around. It's going to be party time for sure, guaranteed.
Well, my brother Tukkiman, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you'd want to comment on, or you about filled up?
Well, I can play a little key for you if you want.
Yeah, do it.
Can you hear the music in the back?
Yeah.
All I know is I don't know where I will be tomorrow. But Saturday night, we're gonna be at Montrose. We're gonna have fun. Come out to party. All I know is I don't know where I will be tomorrow. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Tukkiman. I'm going to come see you tonight. Well, I'm doing this on Friday, but tonight, I get it. I'll see you out there at the Montrose Saloon.
Awesome.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you so much.
Okay, you've been listening to the Live from the Heartland show. It's just a little information. It's broadcast every Saturday morning, but rebroadcast on Tuesdays and Fridays. That's WLUW 88.7 or WLUW.org. You can get us on Spotify and Google Podcasts, Can TV, and anytime, up late at night, up early in the morning, you go to youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos. And there are now 116 of those recent episodes. Next week, we're going to have Clem Balinoff, a little more optimistic this time than the last time we had him talking politics. I had promised you Mike McGraw of the Piranha Brothers, came out of Kelly High School back in the day. He's in Hawaii. He was going to start today, but we're going to do it on the 9th when he does his musical tune to the news. And what else do I got? I got a couple of other radio shows that I suggest you listen to. All on Friday, these other two. There's Hitting Left with Mike Klonsky. That's 11 to noon on WLPN, Lumpin Radio 105.5, lumpinradio.com. And at 2 o'clock, Thorne Dreyer does the Rag blog or the Rag show, Rag Radio on KOOP.org out of Texas. And if you like progressive radio, those are 3 shows by 3 guys. This one, the Klonsky Show, and the Thorne Dreyer Rag Radio Show. So, you've been listening to the Live from the Heartland show, where we question the actions of the rich and the powerful, and we give voice to the servants of the people. Thanks to all the people who make this show possible, particularly Emilio Davis, Katie Hogan, Lynn Orman Weiss, Amani Warren, and Tom Clark, and a bunch of other people who just inspire us to go forward. Do good in the world. The world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people.